So this was created at the end of last year, and as I say, I adapted it. I think I've explained the sort of bit at the beginning about the background of the scheme. And as I've said already, I think that it's a great structure that's been put in place for this because of our kind of understanding of the kind of participatory arts sector in Glasgow and what people might be wanting to apply for. So I guess the purpose of the grant is twofold. It's to help artists be paid for the amazing work that they do, but also to reach youth arts and young people across the country who have been deeply affected by who needed access to the arts before COVID, but certainly would benefit from it even more now. So you need to be a member of Glasgow Can to apply. So if you are on this call and you're not a member, please visit our website and sign up for a member as soon as possible, because we can only accept applications from members. So I'll just scroll up there. So yeah, we've been given £20,000 from Creative Scotland for this particular grant, and we've set the application between £500 and £2,500. And that gives you an idea of how many applications we're going to be able to accept. So everything needs to be done and dusted by the end of March, but that includes your evaluation. So if I was planning a project, I would make sure it was finished up by February, because you'll get an application form through, an evaluation form through from us that obviously you need to give yourself a wee bit of time to complete. And yeah, if you would prefer the application in an alternative format, a language, or any kind of access needs, please just let us know and we can accommodate that. So anyone familiar with Creative Scotland will have seen this kind of information before. They did originally have to include a CV, but I took that out because I felt that it wasn't necessary, because everyone that is going to apply through us will be members of Glasgow Can already and will have given us quite a lot of that information already. So we've taken that element out. It's essential that everyone that applies is a member of the PVG scheme. I think that's quite clear because obviously safeguarding is very, very important, and that's quite a tight turnaround with all of this. So kind of waiting for PVGs to come back, things like that could cause quite a lot of delay, and that would be quite difficult to manage, both for yourselves and for Glasgow Can and Creative Scotland. So I think it's essential that you need to be a member of the scheme. If you, obviously identifying a partner for this is really important, because participatory arts doesn't happen in isolation, and we very much encourage partnerships. So just a kind of statement email, it doesn't even need to be a formal letter, but even a copy of an email from a partner confirming whether that's a building, if that's the premises, although that seems unlikely at the moment, but if you're planning for that for the future and being optimistic, a statement from whoever runs the building that they're up for that kind of support, or a housing association, it could be a local councillor, it could be obviously a youth group would be ideal, a school that you're wanting to work in partnership with, just kind of some kind of evidence that they are have agreed to the partnership in principle. And also evidence, we're obviously safeguarding online and face-to-face, depending on how you envisage your project taking place, is extremely important, and risk assessments. If you need any support with that kind of element, let us know. But what I would hope, the ideal thing, if I was a freelancer doing this, would be that the partner organisation that I was going to deliver the work with, if I don't have my own safeguarding policies and procedures and kind of risk assessments, that they will have that, or at least a risk assessment document that you can adapt. So I think it's really, if you're establishing that partnership, I think safeguarding and assessing risk should be right up there at the top, especially with COVID. Your application would be really unlikely to be successful if you don't have evidence that you've explored these assessing risk and safeguarding, because Glasgow CAM wouldn't be able to envisage how the project could safely take place. Now, from a kind of paperwork point of view, that might be quite time consuming, because I think I do mention later on about kind of plan A and plan B. So you might have to have a kind of safeguarding procedure, policies, and assessing risk for if the project is taking place in a venue or an outdoor location or online. It's something that's a sort of symptom of COVID that I'm having to do as well, that you kind of have to make multiple documents for things depending on scenario, which I appreciate is quite time consuming, but I think unfortunately it's necessary in our current climate, that we have to have these multiple documents. But yeah, if you can lean on your partner organisation to get your hands on these documents that you could maybe adapt, or even better, if someone in the organisation can support you to adapt. But that just depends on the kind of relationship that you might have with that organisation. So that's us kind of covered supporting information. And evidence could just be your PVG scheme number. You don't need to send me scans of your PVG or anything, because that's private information. But even just your scheme membership number and a statement from yourself saying that you are a member would be really good. So skills and experience. We want to see from your application that you have the skills and experience to deliver this kind of program. It's an extremely challenging environment at the moment, and it needs to be clear from your application that you are able to carry out a project like this, and maybe a little bit of reference to kind of projects that you've ran before, either online or face-to-face. If this is your first digital project, that's okay, but just make it clear in the other parts of the application how you're going to approach that. So then we have section D, which is details of the project. How did you identify the need? Is really, really important. How will children or young people get involved in the project? Because as we all know, digital poverty, for example, is a really big problem. So if you were just to say in your application, young people in Maryhill are going to join this, I think that would be too vague and quite unrealistic. So just tell a wee story in there about how you're going to overcome some of the many barriers to young people being able to access. So is that you are working with a third sector organisation based in Maryhill who are able to provide iPads to families, or has that already taken place? Will it be a post? Is it a situation where the materials are going to be posted out to participants? Is it that kind of project? Just make it really clear that you've thought about how people are actually going to access this, because that's one of the hardest challenges at the moment, as we're very aware of, and Creative Scotland are very aware of. We want this process to be as youth-led as possible. So if you have already got a kind of relationship with young people, it'd be great to have some kind of quotes there, and perhaps from the partner organisation, perhaps the partner organisation, young people have been, our children have been asking for some creative activity. So a kind of quote or statement from that to back up that there is a need, and that young people are wanting this would be really good. And obviously about the activity itself, just be very clear about that. Sometimes we receive applications that are very vague about what actual creative activity is going to take place. So just try and be as clear as you can, so that the reader and readers in this case, that it jumps off the page and you can envisage this project. And I've said here as well that we would suggest having a plan A and a plan B for the project plan, because of government restrictions related to COVID-19. So if your ideal is face to face, write that first, write that vision that you've got, and then write a plan B. for sure, unfortunately, because we know what it's like at the moment where it's going back and forth. So that, and also be aware of your plan B when it comes to the budget, but we'll talk about that. Project timeline is so important. Quite often we receive amazing applications, but it isn't clear the kind of beginning, middle, and the end of the project. So if it's going to start in July, if it's a summer holidays project, then put in the school holiday dates. Now, that doesn't mean that that can't have any flexibility, because obviously we know as a small funder that things will change, especially at the moment. But I think it's always good to have a start, what your ideal is. So, break it down into 12 weeks. Maybe you've got 4 weeks prep before that. So you can put, June to July, research, outreach, partnership, work building, preparing the workshops, kind of detail that. The weeks, what happens roughly kind of the 12 weeks of the project, then a month after that for kind of monitoring the evaluation, or if you're having an event, is that a digital event? Really kind of break that down in your application so that it's really clear to the readers, again, just to help us picture what that project's going to be like. We all know that these things change, but that conversation could be had during the process. So you can get in touch with us and say, actually, it's had to be reduced to 8 weeks because that's what was better for the partner organisation, or we realised that that would work better with the client group. It fits in better with the summer holidays, etc., etc. So it's better to have a kind of a vision, a plan A and plan B vision, and sort of deviate from that than just have a quite vague section for that where we can't really, it doesn't really seem like it's that planned out. So that would be a huge bonus. So I think I've got the deadline in there to help on the 16th of March for reporting. And part of our getting this grant for Creative Scotland was that we would have a sharing event on the 23rd of March. So if you were successful, to have that in your diary, and also to build in your costs for that. So that's one of the reasons why evaluation, reporting, the sharing event is all in this guideline description, is so that you can pay yourself for that time. And that's really, really important. So when you work out how many workshops you can deliver, or if it's a one-off event or mini festival, whatever it is you're planning, please build in your costs as an artist, as a practitioner, for planning, delivery, any training events, because we do have a training event as well. Build in your time, and for the sharing event itself. So this is why this is all outlined, so that you're not having to do things where you're not getting paid. But that's kind of up to you to structure that in your budget. So please cover your time, because we don't, we value, obviously, us and Creative Scotland very much value creative practitioners' time. So please remember to build that into your timeline. If all that's kind of missing, then your application is unlikely to be successful, because we only want to support projects where practitioners are being paid for their time. So I think sometimes people make the mistake of either not realizing that, which is totally understandable, or not just putting all the funds and money in towards the kind of artistic delivery, and thinking that funders will think it's okay that you're kind of giving up your time for the other bits. But that's not how we view it at all. We know that planning, prep, evaluation, all that takes up a lot of time and expertise, and we want to know that people are the artists that we support, practitioners we support, are being valued, that are being paid for that time. So there's kind of guidance. If you're not used to doing that, there is guidance on Scottish Artists Union kind of website about what to be paid. So priority groups. There are priority groups as part of this that Creative Scotland have outlined. So your application is unlikely to be successful if the groups that you're targeting, the young people, children that you want to work with, don't fit under, they might fit into them all, but if they don't fall under any of these categories, it's really unlikely that you're going to be successful, because the purpose of this grant is to support artists, but also to support those that most need provision within Glasgow, for us specifically. So we've got living in poverty, so check the SIMD, Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. You can get that information on the Scottish Government website to see if the area that you want to work in, the young people from that area fall under that. Experiencing or at risk from harm and neglect. Young people who are looked after, accommodated. Again, there's information about that on the Scottish Government website, how that's defined. Anyone early years. So I would imagine, obviously, in order for early years, I think a question that might get asked, could adults access to? So if mum, dad, carer, granny, if the only way that little person can access the workshop is there too, then yes, of course, that's fine, because we want little ones to be able to access the project. People from Black, minority, ethnic backgrounds, people who have disabilities or additional support needs, young people who are at risk of offending, young carers, people experiencing homelessness, or people experiencing mental ill health. So again, that might help if you haven't yet identified a partner that you would like to work with. That might help you identify that, if that's the kind of organisation that work with members of these communities. That might help. But as I say, if it doesn't fall under one or two or any of those headings, if you like, demographics, then we wouldn't be able to support the project, because we that's what the money's for, is to help these groups. So making sure people can participate. So this is a really hard thing to do. This is an easy challenge, especially in this environment, but I think I mentioned that before. Please make it clear about how these members of the community are actually going to be able to access the project. Make that really clear. And a bit about, obviously, about how the partnership will work. Partnerships could be amazing, partnerships could also be challenging. So really try and paint a picture about how that partnership will work, and of course your evidence of your safeguarding policies and procedures that you'll hopefully worked out with your partner. And how is the reflecting and evaluation going to take place? Because it kind of be twofold. There might be a way that the partner organisation already reflects and evaluates, that you can fit in with, and maybe there's a way that you like to in your practice, but you'll also be required to complete a form that we will send, that we will try and keep as kind of concise and simple as possible, and you will get well in advance of the deadline, so that you're really familiar with the kind of reporting that we're looking for. But I can provide further guidelines on that. So budget. I would say that 90% of the time, this is just very not a real statistic, please don't hold me to it, but 90% of the time where an amazing application could fall down from an organisation or a freelancer, is the budget. And maybe that's because we're creative types and it's not our number one thing, but I think it's not always so much that. I think it's just understanding what all these different forms, when you're filling out other people's application forms, are all different, and what that means, and that can be really challenging. So if you've got a way that you like to do a budget, you can attach a separate budget and write in the application, please refer to. But I quite like, sorry, this is the risk assessment bit that I'm looking at now. I'll come back to that. I'll show you when I'm going to look at the application form in a second, so we can look at the budget there. So here are some dates that are really important, but you've got them, but I just want to kind of go through those and we'll come back to the budget. So it's quite a quick turnaround, which is nice. The deadline's beginning of March, and you'll know by the end of March whether you've been successful or not. So the in-between time is the decision-making panel. So what's really nice about this is we're going to have 2 young people on the decision-making panel, because Glasgow has a youth arts committee called the Bold Collective, and they are kind of emerging artists and trainees in all of this. And so we really wanted them to be involved in the decision-making process about how funds for children and young people are going to get distributed in the city. So super excited about giving them that experience. So there will be a panel, it will be a Glasgow Can board member, myself, our youth arts coordinator, and 2 of the young people. So we will read all of the applications, and then we'll have a panel meeting, and then we will let people know if they've been successful or not by the end of March. Then it's up to Glasgow Can to get those funds out and contracts signed. So there'll be a contract for agreement for you to sign, and then projects could start from the start of June and they must finish by February. Now that does not mean that you need to use all that time. This could be a week-long project. That's just the window of time that your project can take place. So as I say, this could be a summer holidays project. It could be an October holidays project. That's totally fine. It could be a one-off event. Fine. It's just that's the window of time that it can happen between. And then during that time, you'll receive the monitoring and evaluation form, and it will be due back to us by the 16th of March. And as I say, everyone who's successful, it'd be really great to be part of this sharing event. And that is so, and we will invite partners and things to that event as well, so that people can see, and stakeholders, so like the NHS, schools, so that people can see the value of youth participatory arts, as well as it being a celebration event for all of us about what's taken place. It's also to kind of shout from the rooftops about the kind of activity that is taking place through this fund. So yeah, I've outlined who will be part of the decision-making committee. So this is really important. The networking and training activity bit, please build, that's why I've written the kind of hours there, because that's about paying yourself for your time. So being part of this fund, we want you guys to be part of this process. So please build that into your time, at least, so that you're being paid for your time. So we have our networking event in June where we'll get to meet each other, and we will have our training session, and which the cohort can identify what they'd like that to be in, which I think is pretty good, pretty awesome. And then we will have our sharing event in March. So as I say, please build that into your time. And that's a bit of data protection stuff. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to open up the application form. Okay, so I think I've covered quite a lot of the application form, because obviously the guidance refers to the application form, but it's quite nice that it's opened up on the budget. So there'll be a total, some of you will be really, really experienced with doing budgets, and some less so, and that's totally fine. So as I say, you can attach a separate budget if you find that easier, like an Excel sheet, but please make sure that it makes sense in relation to this budget. Or you might want to do both, whatever works better for you. But just completing this is completely fine. You're not obligated to attach a separate one. So the number one thing is to make sure that your expenditure and your incomes match. I think people get confused with this because they think, well, I've not got the money in yet, but that doesn't matter. So this is your vision for how the project will work. So break down items like, you know, artist time for monitoring, artist time, film editor, all that kind of detail. Put in as much detail as you can. You can add extra lines here if you want, you know, put in detail. So put in brackets a wee bit of how you came to that cost, because sometimes people will just put like freelance artists, £1,000. We need a wee bit more detail than that because we want to know the artists are being paid properly. Is it more than one artist? Yeah, so please make that real as clear as you can. Materials, £500. What kind of materials? Now, please don't like break down like how much, you know, a camera will cost £299 or whatever. Don't need to do that, but just a wee bit if it's film equipment, you know, just a wee bit more detail about what that is. So say the whole and you know, if a camera, you're going to access a camera from a partner organization, then you could put an in-kind monetary value against that, because that's really important. That's really great that you show us that you've built that relationship with that partner, that they trust you, and that partner relationship there is to use the camera equipment. So you could put, you know, camera £500, cash or in kind, and then you show that reflected in the income. So you can put costs that you're asking for the money from Glasgow Can for, but also in kind costs, both with expenditure and income. So your totals need to add. I'd say maybe somebody, maybe like a housing association has actually offered £1,000 in cash to the project. That's amazing. So that's actual funding. Just make that clear that where that source of income is coming from. Always remember to put in contingency. So always put in a percentage, because things change. So a minimum like 5% contingency, I would say. And that means that you don't need to come back to me with kind of things that are changing, because that falls under kind of contingency. Now, you don't have to have any match funding for this. Don't feel the pressure for that in a cash sense. So if you haven't sourced match funding from somebody else, that's fine. You don't have to have it. It can be the full £2,500 if that's what you're going to ask for, is fine. It would be good to see some in-kind support from your partner organisation, because no actual money can go to your partner organisation. It has to go to you. So I would show that relationship with the partner through the in-kind contribution. So in my expenditure, I would have what the project's going to cost, say, to the £2,500 from your point of view, and then you could say in-kind contribution from your partner organisation, £1,000, and maybe detail a bit how you've come to that, whether that's staff time, is there another member of staff that's going to support the project, what's their hourly rate. So that is an in-kind contribution, because that staff member is giving up their time. Is it someone's equipment? Is it someone's hall? Anything like that is an in-kind contribution. Is someone going to be doing the social media for you in kind? Is it a volunteer? So put all that down, but most importantly, make the cost of the project, your expenditure and your income totals match. And then we've got stuff about risks. So again, you can use this section if you don't already have a risk assessment. And if you do, then you can attach that instead. So you could put in this section, please refer to attached risk assessment. And digital signatures are totally fine. and the deadline is the 1st of March. But I'm just going to scroll up a wee bit, see if there's anything I think that we've not talked through. This bit's all kind of obvious. The main art form, the music and wider arts thing, that's because the government want to see a portion of this going to music projects. So I wouldn't worry about that. If it's not a music project, that's totally fine. Number of days work, I think that's quite clear. The supporting information, we've talked about skills and experience in the guidelines, and project details. I made the word count quite small, like 200, 300 words, just to demonstrate be concise and to the point. And this, we don't want this to take up. We know, we're aware of how much time application forms take, so I've tried to keep it quite concise, to help you be concise as well. Outlining key dates and milestones, that's quite clear with the priority groups, that's very important. Describing how you're going to reach them. Barriers, which we've talked about, digital poverty, for example. Tell us about any partner organisations you want to work with, that's very important. And yeah, ideally, really, the partners agreed. That will make your application a lot more favourable. A bit about how you reflect on the work. And we've talked about budget, but I'm open to questions for that. And the risk assessment, I think that just about covers things from my end. I'm going to stop sharing